We all need to answer the question, who am I and where did I come from?
That is an intricate part of family, saying that, my kinfolks are from here, and this is what we derive from, and this is our story.
What did they go through so that I can live this life that I'm living today as the manifestation of their wildest dreams?
Through those stories, we understand, what binds us together as family. But more importantly, that is a means by which we carry on our traditions in our family by knowing that knowledge.
That's why I'm so passionate about getting people to research their family histories, because you will find your heroes. You will go, what? Every family has heroes, every one.
Juneteenth, 1865 to 2025. Kinfolk and family.
The story of Juneteenth and freedom is also the story of family. The fight to keep it, the struggle to rebuild it, and the legacy it leaves behind.
Here at the Levi Jordan Plantation, generations of enslaved people endured separation and hardship, yet they formed bonds that could never be broken.
But before there was separation, there was unity. And before displacement, there were deep roots. Roots that stretched far beyond this land and plantations like it.
This is the journey of African American families from slavery to reunification through separation and injustice, time-honored family traditions.
But to better understand African American families and their kinfolk, we must first start at the beginning. In Africa, where family was the foundation of life.
The family unit has been something that has been around pretty much since the beginning of time. There on the continent in the villages, you would have had families, multi-generations, grandmother, grandparents living around close by. So there was a strong family unit in Africa.
Before the start of the transatlantic slave trade, most West Africans were affiliated with tribes and lived in small villages where life revolved around the extended family or clan. Identity wasn't shaped by borders or nation, but mostly by kinship.
Our definition of family, I think, is a broader definition. We know the difference between a biological family and our kinfolks. Our kinfolks, we might have grown up on the same block with them, and we called them our cousin. That's my play brother, my play sister. That's my little cousin. And that's just how we keep a family bond.
It's very much part of African American culture.
I think so, and I think it points back to customs that preceded our life on this continent, and it probably came from our life in a village.
That tribal community,
right, which is family.
The idea that family is not just blood, but community would become an essential part of survival and identity in the Americas with slavery.
"55% of that transatlantic slave trade went to South America, 35% into the Caribbean islands, and only 6% to what we consider North America. So when we think about the transatlantic slave trade, we think that we were straight shot over from Africa to the United States. But actually, because South America is closer, they went there first.
So you had family displaced among the different continents.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes, particularly when you had groups of people who were in tribes that spoke the same languages, right? They would separate them simply because they could communicate with each other. And you had less instance of them actually trying to revolt because they didn't know the other person's language. And you group them with somebody who didn't know Wolof or didn't know any other the Western African dialects, And so they were split up. The other side of it is, as people began to engage in the slave trade, villages moved further inland. And so as they moved further inland, you had long treks. As you can see, people refer to coffles of slaves being chained together and being brought back to the coast to be put into these slave castles. One that I visited in Ghana, Elmina, where people were held there before they were put on a ship to the Americas. And so these images of being at Elmina, another castle in Ghana, Cape Coast on the Gold Coast, are reflections on our past to where people were subjugated to this in the interest of capital gain.
At those slave castles, do we know if families were further separated there?
Yes. For instance, at Elmina, the women and the men were separated, women and children and the men were separated. The men were taken further underground because they were the immediate threat. If there was a revolt, the men would likely be the candidates who would be part of it. And so they were separated at that point, and that begins that narrative and that separating families, and particularly along gender lines with women and men. And it started before you even got on the boat.
Once in the Americas, enslaved people were constantly under the threat of being separated.
You know, one of the visits I had to the Whitney plantation, I believe they described one mother that had 15 children, and all of the children eventually had been sold off from her.
Even after the auction block, there was a chance that family members could be sold off or traded at any time.
It's possible that certain individuals could be willed to different children. So the father may be willed to one son or daughter in the family, and the wife and children may be willed to someone else, because again, they're dividing the property up based on value. One of the worst times for enslaved people was at the end of the year, either after a death or taxes, because if an owner had to pay taxes and needed to raise capital, one of the ways that they raised capital was by selling some of their property. And at that time, they may sell individuals. So the holidays, Christmas and New Year's, was not always a good time for enslaved people. You know, the economics of this is also a big part of how families were divided.
So oftentimes, one of the tactics to retaliate against unwanted behaviors from enslaved people was they would split your families up. In case we know with Harriet Tubman's family, right? Understanding what she did and how his family was split up as a result of her engaging in the Underground Railroad. So we have to think about the value of that, right? This is something that you covet. And as your master, as the person who owns you, I'm going to take that from you, right?
Harriet Tubman was born into slavery in Maryland and feared being sold away to the Deep South. As a child, she was torn from her family and then rented out to work as a nursemaid. After escaping to freedom, Harriet couldn't stop thinking about her family and made the courageous decision to return. Not just once, but many times, guiding her relatives and other enslaved people to freedom. Driven by the painful memories of family separation, she ultimately led 70 people to freedom, including her own mother and father.
Let's talk about the historic site that we're on. Who founded and owned the plantation and when? Give us a little background as to who that family was and when they came here, and who they came here with.
Yeah, the Levi Jordan family came in 1848. They actually owned two other plantations in Louisiana and Arkansas. But at that time in 1848, Texas had just become a state in December 29th, 1845, as part of the United States. So they were looking for settlers to come in, colonists, and husbands could get 640 acres. Wives, if you had you got 320 for your wife, 160 for each child, and then 80 for each enslaved person that you brought in. Now, this plantation was actually purchased from Samuel May Williams, who was one of Stephen F. Austin's assistants early on in the 1820s. So Jordan purchased this plantation site, half a league, a little bit over 2,200 acres from Samuel May Williams. He had 12 enslaved people with him at the time. He left 9 originally, went back, sold his other plantations, and then moved his family in. So he came to Texas to look for economic opportunity. And from 1848, those original 9 to 12 enslaved people, to 1860, where he had over 130, I think 134. He had grew the plantation site to have over 100 enslaved people. And some estimated at the height, it may have had as many as 150 here on site. They grew sugar and cotton.
2 cash crops cultivated by the enslaved people and tended to by them even after emancipation as sharecroppers. Their history is now the focus behind extensive preservation work done on the plantation property and its archaeology lab and education center.
Why should people visit a site such as this, a plantation?
Well, it is particularly complicated for African Americans because oftentimes these sites are associated with pain and torture and darkness. But in these spaces that our ancestors loved and lived and worked, and their blood, sweat, and tears are in the soil. So they have a right to be in these spaces to connect with that memory.
Marriage between the enslaved was forbidden, but in the absence of a legal union, they established their own marriage ritual by jumping the broom.
This tradition that starts, when you don't even have really a formal ceremony, right? There was something that you could do. You had a broom and you brought that out, and that symbolized something that the community witnessed, this union, and they coming together and they jumping of the broom. And this was a ceremony, but this also was identification, showing that we recognize and we respect this union. And you think about, in a very inhumane sense, them really realizing the true value of the situation that they were in. They really were not respected at that time. But this was something that gave them kind of their right to passage by jumping this broom and saying that, I've claimed a piece of happiness in life through this union. And so we see when freedom came, the first thing they wanted to do was legitimize marriages. It wasn't just my master put us together. We wanted to actually go get a marriage license to say that we were officially and legally bound to each other. Having the opportunity to say emotionally, I'm attached to this person and that's who I want to be with legally, not forcibly, they took this opportunity in freedom.
Well, how old were you when you married?
I don't think 18 years old. Maybe that old. I didn't know my age.
Who'd you marry?
Jim Smith.
Jim Smith. Had he been a slave?
Oh, yeah. He was a slave. After the breakup, they sent him. He come from Blanco and bought a home over across the creek while we bought a home, joining our home.
Well, he had been freed then, I guess, the same time you had.
Oh, yes. They lived at Blanco. They bought them a home over in the colony. Riley had sold the colored people all the homes there.
Who's Riley?
A white man named Riley lived right down the hill from us. They sold Pete Beard a home, and Paul home, Uncle David home, all of them.
Well, I'm glad. That was right after the big breakup, was it?
About 2-3 years after the breakup.
Huh, and you just had a colony of...
Yes, all of that colony. Where I come from, it's got homes out there. That Buda, they call it now. It wasn't nothing but woods when we bought it.
They call it Buda then?
Yeah.
Oh, I know where Buda is out there.
Yes.
How'd you marry? Did you have a preacher to marry you?
Of course, a white preacher married us.
You did?
Mm-hmm. White preacher married all of us girls. Yeah.
In African American familiar culture, there is family and there is kinfolk. Can you explain to me the differences and or similarities between those?
I think it goes back to plantation families. Plantation families, there was a lot of biological siblings, but there were also plantation siblings, people who grew up together, shared life together, and that's my kin people. That's my cousin. We are much more accepting of an extended family than a biological family. And in many cases, we may not have known. We may have been brought together and put together in circumstances back then when we don't know where we came from. It was frequently the case that their biological father was not present because they were sold away or not allowed to participate as the father. And of course, there are also the cases where the biological mother was impregnated by an enslaver. The family dynamic had to be a lot broader than the nuclear family.
Everyone's an auntie or an uncle or a cousin, but they're not really by blood an auntie or uncle or cousin. That's kinfolk that stemmed from those original origins on a plantation.
You think about that term and that root word, kin, and having been forcibly taken from Africa, and the only vestiges of what you knew was yours was those who were kin to you. It's been an ongoing theme in the Black experience to where we always value family, even in our destitute state of being in bondage. When we say kinfolk, that's a term of endearment to where we connect with each other and we understand that we have a shared experience, but more importantly, that love and that emotion that we share between us.
June 19, 1865 is the day that Major General Gordon Granger arrives here in Galveston to issue General Order Number 3.
The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere.
People were displaced, right? And so after freedom came, you think about that at emancipation moment, right? The first thing that you want to go do is to go find your blood kin, right? My husband was sold here. My kids were sold here. You're trying to find them, and you're trying to reconnect with them in some way. But this often proved to be very problematic, and people had to start back over. Once the South was split up into 5 military districts, they would go to the adjunct general's office and the local Freedmen's Bureau office to inquire about, the whereabouts, because they kept records about where formerly enslaved people were.
They would have worked with the Freedmen's Bureau to reconnect with their family. Some of them ran ads in papers describing their family members. Have you seen this person of maybe a certain age?
I wish to inquire for January and Becky Grimble, my stepchildren. I have not seen them for 39 years. I then went by the name of Toby Grimble, but since freedom, I have gone by my own name, Emmanuel Toby. Should they see this, they will please write to me at Houston, Harris County, Texas, Emmanuel Toby.
They did what they could. It was the internet of that time, the printed press. So they were making a post in hopes that somebody would see it, like it, or know that information and then share that information.
Allow me to inquire through your valuable paper for my daughter. She left Austin about the year 1869 and went to Galveston with Mrs. Perry and lived there with Mrs. Feldman. She afterwards went to New Orleans, and that is the last I heard of her. Her father's name is Lonzo Harrison, mother's Minnie Harrison. They live in Austin, Texas. Her brothers' names are James, Robert, and Lonzo Harrison. Sisters, Lizzie, Esther, and Emmeline Harrison. Address me at Austin, Texas, in care of Reverend D. Gregory. Minnie Harrison.
What role did churches play in trying to reconnect families?
Churches played a very vital role in this. You would seek out individuals that may have had information. Well, I was on this plantation and you could give me information about that particular person. In the event that you didn't find that person, this was your new family, right, in these congregations. But even when people had to start over, right, they would get married in their church. They would belong to that church and they would support that local church. And so that church was a very important local institution in maintaining family. There are a number of documented cases that we have where people would send letters to certain churches or individuals that they have, and they would read those during church announcements, right? To where they would see if a loved one was located in that particular church, and they would announce it, right? And there would be an open public space to where everyone could hear it. And even if you weren't at church that day, you know, somebody that you know was there, they could come back and bring you the information. These were all opportunities that emancipated people took to reunite and to reconnect with family. Thinking about this at this moment, Reconstruction comes, what did freedom really have to offer, right? You think about it at that moment. I mean, you think you're not the first round draft pick. You only own the clothes on your back. So you're starting from scratch in terms of being able to take care of your necessities. You didn't own any property. So you had African Americans who became property owners, became small business owners, right? They were resilient.
Jim Crow laws, redlining, and racial violence made freedom seem as though it was a false promise. But despite it all, they risked everything to build Black-owned businesses, churches, and HBCUs like Prairie View A&M University, once a plantation turned higher learning institution.
Coming in, this would be the main thoroughfare coming into campus. This was pretty much the same entrance that would come into the plantation because the main house was located right here just back behind us. And so this was a very vibrant place in terms of work.
But not long after slavery, newly freed people went to work on themselves, learning and building new lives together as a community.
Community building was absolutely paramount to the survival of emancipated Blacks in this country. I can't understate that, community building, because without those community institutions, those churches, those schools, having recreation a part, right? There was no semblance of having a good quality of life, right? Even with the threats of Jim Crow society that loomed around you, right? I think that that's important, and we have to remember that, right? That these people did their best to insulate themselves, to protect themselves from that violence, but more importantly, to sustain that institutional family.
It is all the more reason to honor those who came before us. Today, family reunions remain a powerful link to the past and a testament to the deep bonds born from a difficult history.
It feels like their presence is still felt when you turn onto the property.
The families once forced to work the Levi Jordan plantation in Brazoria are not forgotten.
I'm here to help them tell their story.
Their stories live on, an ongoing narrative of kinfolk and family. Stories that mirror the journey of so many African American families, including genealogist Sharon Batiste Gillens and her ancestors.
This is John Batiste. The earliest record I have of John is when he was 5 months old in the inventory of the estate of a man named Philip Rawls in St. Mary Parish, Louisiana, along with his mother, Phoebe.
Sharon has archived her family photos and mementos for safekeeping, including one priceless piece of paper.
And this is a family tree that my father wrote out for me. And this is the document that started me on my family research journey. And it is a treasure to me.
It was penned decades ago at her father's family reunion.
The family reunion is a time to bring together those people who share those common bonds and share those stories and find out who is doing what and build a new sense of community.
The time-honored tradition of family reunions traces back to emancipation, when freed people searched for lost relatives and gathered to rebuild their families. For generations, Black families have reunited whenever and wherever they could, returning home to church pews, family homesteads, and public parks that welcome them. The tradition continues nearly 160 years later.
What happens at the family reunion?
We eat. Everybody wants to share their favorite family recipe.
It's also a time for photos, family, and cherished fellowship.
Who were the children born since the last time we all came together? Who are the ancestors who left us and they're now our angel ancestors? Honor the ones who came before.
Did he live to see emancipation?
He did. He did. He became a landowner quite quickly after he was emancipated. So by the 1870s, early 1870s, he was already a landowner, which is pretty incredible.
Another incredible story, as only prideful descendants could tell. in each other's company and for each other's keeping.
Faith and family. Antioch Missionary Baptist Church here on the edge of downtown Houston. Founded in 1866 by formerly enslaved people, the city's first Black Baptist church, a beacon of faith, resilience, and community.
And at the pulpit, Reverend John Henry Jack Yates, a pioneering pastor and patriarch of one of Houston's founding Black families.
They laid the foundation for what the trajectory of progress would be like for the African American community.
Yates was also instrumental in the establishment of Emancipation Park in Houston's 3rd Ward, a park with purpose that would serve as the backdrop of everything from civil rights demonstrations to celebrating freedom.
Think about with the Yates family in the park and subsequently those Juneteenth celebrations that were held. This was a commemoration where people came together to remember and to reflect, but not only remember and reflect, to chart an avenue to a greater future.
Today, Emancipation Park hosts Houston's annual Juneteenth celebration, an enduring legacy of the Yates family vision and a tribute to their determination.
How do families like the Yates family serve as models for building and sustaining that Black legacy, that Black family legacy?
Perseverance, right? Seeing a way when you have no way, right? But you found a way to make it happen. And I think when you think about the situation that they came into being in segregated Houston, there were not many no African Americans who were large property owners around at that time, right? Understanding that the ways in which we build community is through obtaining property, which is very important.
Why was land ownership such a powerful symbol post-emancipation?
Land ownership is significant simply because if you had land, you could have a farm. From that farm, you could support yourself, right? We lived in an agricultural society. Texas's economy at this time was primarily agricultural, right? There's not an oil boom. There's not a energy sector that you could go work in. But if you had land and owned land, they provided you with a way in which you could support yourself and your family. But more importantly, you could build community through that, right? You had a lot of African Americans that gave portions of their lands that you could build a church on it, right? You could build a local school on it. And so through these freedom colonies that were established during this time, through African Americans gaining land by whichever ways they were able to get it, right? They were able to sustain community and build families from that.
We danced with the fireflies and played with the doodle bugs.
I remember falling asleep to the howls of coyotes and waking up before sunrise.
Spent time out there mending fences, digging post holes, and rounding up cattle.
This is a story about a family and their land. Hundreds of acres in Victoria County, land that has helped build wealth across 6 generations.
They knew that the land was going to be the thing that would propel them into better lives. It would be the thing that would change the trajectory of their lives.
Mickey Flowers and her twin sister, Vicky Fabre, are 4th-generation family members.
And out here is where we've used this as a kite flying
Looks perfect
field.
for kite
Yeah,
flying.
I love this as the kite flying field. Yeah. Who can get the highest?
The land was their playground as children. There were pigs, horses, and a pet cow, all made possible by their great-grandfather. In 1879, 14 years after Juneteenth, when all slaves were freed, Frederick Rydolph and his brother, former slaves, purchased 200 acres for $500.
They put $125 down each, so that was half of the money owed for the land. Then they had $250 left, which they paid over 2 years.
This is a copy of the deed of sale. You can see the $250 down payment. Frederick Rydolph and his wife Rosie had 8 children. Their son, Pete Rydolph, and his wife Gertrude expanded their portion of the homestead to nearly 3,000 acres. They passed down their work ethic and ranching legacy to their only child, Ross Rideoff Giles, and her husband, Leslie Giles. The next generation called the ranch the Circle G, after Gertrude, or as the twins called her, Grandma Gertie.
Grandma Gertie described herself as a little bit of leather well put together. She was an avid hunter, and so you'd see her with a shotgun at her side and birds strapped on her belt that she had killed, that she'd shot.
Grandma Gertie was the first in the family to go to college, graduating from Prairie View A&M in 1917. She was then hired by the state of Texas to teach children at the Bloomington Colored School and was paid $30 a month. In the 1930s, oil and gas was discovered on the property. Pete and Gertrude used the proceeds to pay off debt and build the kind of wealth the son of a former slave could not have imagined. The family was respected and admired. But a notorious scandal nearly derailed all their hard work.
Pete Rideoff became the first black millionaire here in Victoria County, but his wealth and his reputation also made him a target. In 1954, he was the victim of an infamous kidnapping plot.
The news made headlines. Rideoff was kidnapped by 2 white men, a white woman, and a black man. He was forced to pose for pictures in bed with the woman. The men threatened to claim he raped her if he didn't pay a ransom. Rideoff paid $30,000 and was let go. The FBI was called in. 2 of the men were later convicted and sentenced to decades in prison.
It was a story that was covered across the nation.
The kidnapping is one of the reasons the twins' parents decided to move west to California when they were 6 years old. But they returned to the ranch during holidays and every summer. Both settled in Seattle after graduating from the University of Washington. Vicky became a lawyer. Mickey, a longtime TV news anchor.
We've all had the opportunity to have different careers and professions other than just farming and ranching, but we knew that it was all made possible by this land.
Mickey's sons, Chris and Ross Flowers, also grew up going to the ranch.
But we would brand cows, we would go to rodeos, we'd go to auctions.
Ross is now a sports psychologist in California. Chris, a renowned cancer doctor at MD Anderson.
It's inspirational to me personally. It's one of those things that drives me every day, to be honest, in terms of knowing the things that they went through over the course of their history to be able to create, establish, and to maintain this legacy for decades.
Is the thought that this will always be in the family?
Absolutely.
146 years later, the legacy is alive and thriving, overcoming racism, scandal, and even the very forces of nature.
The land has withstood Mother Nature.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So have you.
Yes.
Well, probably not as good as the land.
Yes.
2 years ago, we explored another family legacy, the descendants of the plantation owners of the very land where Prairie View A&M University now sits. It's a powerful story in episode 2 of the award-winning Juneteenth documentary series, also available for you to stream on KHOU 11+.
Got my dinner ready yet, honey?
Be ready in about 15 minutes.
What are you doing there, boy? Speeding? Huh?
Why don't you go out on the porch and rest a while?
Okay. Come on, boys. Let's go. Come on. Come on. Here, let me get the baby out of the way for you.
Let's start with the inspiration behind Late August and this rather unique name.
All of our concepts within the hospitality group are based on history in some kind of way. When it came to this one, we're in the old Sears building. So then I started trying to research my connection with Sears, Roebuck Company. And it's a bunch of things that stood out. And one, how they desegregated the shopping experience for Americans. And then two, the Christmas catalog. When I started trying to research that, like when it came out, all I could ever find was late August, no definitive date. And so I thought it would be a great starting point for us because it didn't lock me into anything as far as like culinarily speaking, like it's vague, I could do whatever I want. So this is our cowpea hummus made with black eyed peas. It's topped off with a little of Chef Sergio's chorizo.
What influences the food palette and selection here at Late August?
Fortunately, I met Chef Sergio about 1.5 years ago.
We have our memelita we're making right now. It has the citrus pork.
It took me back to this idea that I had about 8 years ago when I was traveling through Mexico. Hello. I was in Oaxaca, and I discovered, the history of this Afro-Mex population in Costa Chica, which is in the southern part of Oaxaca, which is the largest Afro-Mexican population in Mexico. And so when I started to get that history, I started to see Oaxacan food differently. When I was in Oaxaca, this is one of the most striking things that I tasted on the first day. And chapulines are just dried crickets. I started to connect with it in a different way, and I always wanted to do something that highlighted that story that I think nobody's really discussed. They don't really consider, like how Mexico's at the southern end of the Underground Railroad. And then we just bring it to life with the mustard green frills. When I met Sergio, speaking with him, I was like, I had this idea, man, about pulling these cultures together and putting them on a plate. And he was like, whoa. That's interesting, like Afro-Mex. I was like, Afro-Mex. So this is my great-grandmother's hot roll dough, the original recipe that we make over at Lucille's. We found another iteration of it, another use for it. I threw it in the fryer and this came out. And it's the perfect accompaniment to the hummus.
Chris, what is it about family recipes that make them so special and enduring?
Like anybody can make anything and have their own iteration of it, but the family story that goes along with the recipe is what really makes them powerful. That's how our ancestors stay in the conversation. If you're smart enough and fortunate enough to have some of these old recipes and cherish them and keep them and pass them down and try them, it's tangible history that you can taste.
Your great-grandmother's name is on your other restaurant. How has she influenced your overall food philosophy, even in this fusion that you create here?
So she was a free woman ahead of her game from the very beginning, and you could see it in the recipes from her cookbook. A Japanese bean pie, to bake Alaska, to 6 different types of béarnaise sauce. Like, she did everything as a free, curious culinarian should do. So yeah, that's influenced me from the beginning. I never felt locked in any kind of specific genre of cooking.
It's such an interesting take on hummus.
Yeah.
And so delicious.
What do you hope people walk away with, other than just a great meal, when they dine at one of your establishments?
Well, if it's African Americans, I hope they feel empowered. And for everybody else, I hope they feel informed.
I think that all history is more important when you can see how your family was a part of that history. The history of World War I becomes way more important when you know your great uncle served in World War I. The history of the Civil War becomes way more important to you and understanding it when you realize that your great-grandfather was in the United States Colored Troops. Let's look at 2 of the most commonly used sources for family history information. Vital records like marriage records and birth records and census records. Well, if you're talking about census records, the census started in 1790. But for enslaved ancestry, the first time that formerly enslaved people are included in the census is 1870. So you can't find their names in 1790, 1800, 1810, 20, 30. So there's a whole span of time where you are no longer looking for your ancestor's name. Before emancipation, enslaved people were not treated as people, so they were not recorded as people, they were recorded as property. So there will be no birth records. They had no ability to enter into a contract, so there will be no marriage contract. And so you cannot find that type of record. And so a lot of the information that you have to put together in developing the story or reconstructing the story of an African American family that survived slavery is indirect evidence. You have to put together indirect evidence as opposed to direct evidence, so there's a lot more critical analysis required. You have to work a lot harder to find the information, but it is there.
It sounds so involved.
It is.
Yes. Overwhelming, do you think? Do you think African Americans, when they're looking at genealogy and their family history and lineage, do they get to a stopping point when they get to that point, because it does become more layered and more involved and more complicated?
A lot of people do, and they call it the brick wall, the 1870 brick wall, because that's when the name trail changes.
But you'll never know unless you start the journey and start researching your family.
Start in your own house. Start in your own home. Collect the items in your own home that tell the story of your family. Get the photographs, the quilts, the old video recordings. Pull them together and see what you have. And then talk to your oldest relatives.
Well, when I was a little girl in slave days, I always had something to do every day. Every day. I didn't have time to play very much at all, because I myself was in the house for most of the time. In days like this, while we were outdoors, pulling up weeds or picking up feathers where the chickens would all make them through the yard.
Interviewing your elders is really, really important. You can do it formally or you can do it informally. You can keep notes if you're not a technical person, but it really is very important. And the Smithsonian has a beautiful guide to how to conduct oral history interviews, and they give you suggested questions about how to do that.
These are my family photos capturing moments in time across generations. But how do you discover the stories behind the photographs, about relatives you never met? I started my discovery with the oldest living relative at the time, my mother, Carolyn. She was one of 6 children. That's her, on the far left with her siblings and her mother. We shared an interest in family history. So, long before she died in 2022, I taped a conversation with my mother.
I was born September the 29th, 1935 at 11:05 p.m. at Stouter Memorial Hospital, Troy, Ohio.
Troy, Ohio, a small, peaceful town in the southwest part of the state. The population the year my mother was born was about 7,000. But how did my family wind up here? Like millions of African Americans, my great-grandfather joined the Great Migration from the Jim Crow South for better opportunities in the North.
My grandparents on my father's side, they're the ones I'm most familiar with. His name was Hugh Thompson Wheat. Her name was Emma Lena Buchanan Wheat. Hugh Thompson was born in Noonan, Georgia. She was born in Montgomery, Alabama. They married in December 1903 in Montgomery, Alabama.
And did they raise their children there?
They raised their children predominantly in Montgomery, but then my grandfather was a brick mason. He built post office and cotton mills in the South, so he traveled. They left Montgomery and went to Thomaston, Georgia. And from Thomaston, Georgia, he went to Detroit and built huge houses for really rich people. When he was there was another person there from Montgomery, Alabama, who was up there building houses. And he told him, he said, "Hugh, if you want to make money, come to Troy, Ohio."
That recommendation would change the course of our family for decades to come. My great-grandmother, Emma B. Wheat, along with her two sons, my grandfather, Hugh, and his younger brother, Clarence, would pack up and leave Thomaston, Georgia, to join my great-grandfather in Ohio.
And he sent for his family in Thomaston, and Emma B. and Clarence and Hugh B. took the train. And when they crossed the Ohio River, my grandmother told her sons, "Look back, we're never going back." And she never went back, and my father never went back.
What year did they move to Troy?
1921.
My grandfather was just 15 at the time. He was the first of 3 generations of family members to graduate from Troy High School. He went on to attend Howard University in D.C., class of 1929. He returned to Troy with a degree in chemistry, married my grandmother, and raised a family. He ended up driving a laundry truck for several years because no one would hire a black chemist. He had left the South, but my mother says the family did not escape racism or segregation.
Every week we went to the movies. At the Mayflower Theater, we had to sit in the right-hand rear section of the movie.
Yet my mother remembers her small hometown as fairly nice and quiet.
You didn't have television.
Yeah.
You listened to the radio.
Oh, yes. Saturday morning, just like the kids listen to cartoons, we got up on Saturday morning and listened to Let's Pretend and all the different shows that came on. And my brother said once years ago that wouldn't it be amazing if we could see what was on, what we hear? Yes, but we used our imaginations.
She could not have imagined that one day every home would have a television, and she would watch her oldest son report the news. Like all families, we've had our share of tragedies and misfortune. My mother never got the full story in some cases because her parents and grandparents just didn't talk about it, and it wasn't polite to ask.
People were much more private. People did not spill their beans, spill their guts, tell all their troubles. I mean, you see these talk shows and stuff now where people are telling stuff. I mean, that stuff people dug a hole and put in the ground, act like it didn't exist.
My conversation with my mother lasted about an hour, but it is a window into my family history that is now oral history, to be passed down to future generations. Find genealogy resources and a quick start guide at KHOU.com.
And be sure to watch all 5 installments of the Juneteenth documentary series with family. Available on KHOU 11+.
It's not a weekend project.
It's not a weekend project. It's not a project that you finish. Because every time you find one relative, a new person that you didn't know, they had a mom and a daddy. There's more work. And so it's not something you ever finish. You look at it as a journey, not as a destination. And it's a puzzle. It's a 1,000-piece puzzle. And sometimes the puzzle pieces look like they're going to fit, but they don't. And you just have to keep trying until the puzzle fits and until you can begin to see the picture of your family emerge over time.
Here at Emancipation Park, families came together not just to remember the past, but to claim their future.
They planted seeds of hope, built schools, churches, businesses, parks, and passed down land and values. And most of all, love through the generations.
From kinfolk to legacy, from survival to celebration, we honor all those who fought for what mattered most, family.
Because Juneteenth isn't just a holiday. It's a story of freedom, family, and the ties that forever bind us.